This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so the last time we met was on Friday, and then I had to, let's say, taken off for a couple of days. So on Friday, we were discussing more on the virtual networks. We said what is a virtual network, what is a subnet, what is something known as a CIDR address space, and after that, we said how do you create multiple subnets, what is the address that you get, and what you can do with the addresses. And we said, okay, fine, if you have a storage account, you can place that storage account inside a network and you can protect that storage account and you can limit who can visit, who cannot visit that, and all that stuff. Now, what I want to go into is an extension of this topic, and I want to come down into something known as a virtual machines. So, this is what we are going to talk about. So, before I get started with this concept, I just want to hear from you all. What do you really mean by a virtual machine? Did any one of you all come across this term called VM or a virtual machine? If yes, then what do you really understand by this?
which is we cannot touch,
I'm sorry, can you come again, please?
which we cannot touch.
Which you cannot touch. Yes, virtual is something that you cannot touch. That's true. Which is just existing on a virtual space on the cloud. Okay, so it's something that you cannot touch. Yes, that's virtual. Anyone else on what do you mean by a virtual machine out here as such?
replicate of replicate of local machines.
A replicate of local. Okay. Yes.
where you will not have a physical machine with a CPU, monitor, and everything. It will be placed in some other location.
Okay. It'll be placed in some other location where you do not have, let's say, a monitor, a CPU, and etc. But you will
Right,
still be able to use it.
right.
But you'll, let's say, still be able to use it.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. That is what the definition of a virtual machine really is. So that is what is a virtual machine. Okay, it's something which is virtual in nature. But the second most important question is that why do you even need a virtual machine? I already have a physical machine. Why don't we not use a physical machine? Okay, sorry, can you come again, please? Mhm. Okay, where you cannot use a physical machine, there you can use a virtual machine. But where can I not use a physical machine? Where can I use a virtual machine? Let's drill down on top of it. Okay, let's mute this out. Okay, let's drill down on this one. So, in order to understand the significance of what really a virtual machine is, let's understand how application is actually developed. Application development, a little bit of it. Let's say that we will take a very simple application called irctc.co.in. So you are a developer who's developing irctc.co.in and etc. So what you do is like as a developer, you take months and months of time to write the code for this particular application. Okay, Hanuman, yeah, thank you. Thanks for going mute. Right. So you are a team of developer and you go ahead, you write the code for this particular, let's say, application called irctc. And the very first thing that we as a development team do is that after you write the code, we check this on our local machine on or the computer where you have developed this code. We check this out and we see, okay, fine, is everything working okay? Is there any issues with that? All that stuff, yes, good enough. But see, this is the code that is sitting in my local laptop. I tested it on my local laptop, which is good enough. But I now need to deliver it to my client. When I say delivering it to my client, as a client or as the end user, whoever is the end user, like for example, you are an end user who just wants to book a ticket. So you will become my client. You are giving me some amount of revenue. Whenever you're doing some transaction on IRCTC, right? You pay some amount to IRCTC that you know what this is what the amount, and that's how they kind of, let's say, generate the revenue out there and extra. So you would want to go to this particular website called irctc.co.in. So whenever you go to your browser on your computer, and type in irctc.co.in, this irctc.co.in is nothing but a name. This is the name of a website. We call this as a friendly domain name, or in a very technical terminology, we call this as a DNS name, a domain name system name out here, a domain name service out here. Is that for you and for me to understand that what is irctc.co.in? Yes, this is where you go and click the route. But internally, this should now take you to the destination of the code, meaning where the code is actually hosted. In our case, where it is hosted? In this particular local machine. See, but the problem is that your local machine or the physical machine out here that you have has a very limited capacity. Like it has a very limited capacity out here. I cannot take in so many requests on my physical machine. My machine will simply crash. And also, whenever you are dealing with machines like a Windows operating system, the Windows operating system that I am using is a Windows 11 operating system out here. This is not meant to host a code. This is a home operating system. It's a home operating system out here. To host a code, you have something called server operating systems and all that. We'll talk about that. But I cannot host this code directly on my machine out here. This is something that I cannot do. So I need a space where I can host it. That is where I will buy something called as a server. Server. Now what's going to happen here is that I have to, let's say, go ahead place the order for this particular server with a company something like Dell or something like that. I need to get this server. I need to maintain this server, and I will go ahead and host the code on top of the server. So I'll go ahead place the code on top of the server, and this server will have its own IP address. Whenever you buy a server, it will have its own IP address out here. So what will happen is, as and when you go ahead and hit this website called irctc.co.in, this will internally look for the IP address of the server. It will tell you which server is hosting this particular, let's say, name called irctc.co.in, and it'll say, okay, fine, this is the IP address of the server. I got the IP address of the server. After it gets the IP address of the server, it will go into a specific location, or it will go into the specific folder of the server, get the entire code, and in return will give you the application. So what does this mean is that you can now go ahead start interacting with it. So for example, if I go ahead and open up, let's say, something like a PowerShell on my local machine, and I just type in one small command called resolve hyphen DNS name hyphen name, and give that particular website name called irctc.co.in. Do you see you are able to get the IP address in written? So when you are doing a resolve DNS name, it's telling, okay, fine, you know what, this DNS name is having a backend IP address, something like this, which is owned by whom? The government. It's telling, okay, fine, this is the server which is, let's say, owned by the government. And whenever you are typing this particular name, you will go into this particular IP address, and that particular IP address is nothing but the IP address of a server, and that server has all your code and it is giving you in return. So it's a client server model. So you are the client, you are requesting a server, in the backend it is giving you the code. Then what is the issue with this model? Like now I said that, you know what, you need a server. The biggest issue with this is that, see, I firstly have to do one thing. In order for this to work, you will have to buy this server. You have to buy this. You'll have to maintain this. You'll have to make sure periodic updates are going on, because the server also has a lot of operating systems, software, a lot of things out here that is hosted on top of it. So you'll also have to make sure that this maintenance is going around. Now with all these things, just imagine how much of cost I'm paying even before my business is getting started, because server is not a small piece of machine, it's a very huge machine that I have. Also, again, just coming back to my very first class demo, see, I was telling that I purchased the server. When I purchased the server, I have in my mind that 100 users will be visiting my application per second. This is what I had in my mind. And I bought about 100 GB capacity, storage capacity or processing capacity of this particular server. What if 1,000 users are visiting my application per second? Will this capacity be sufficient? No, it won't be sufficient. So very simple, users will face an issue telling that server is not available. When you're trying to do some payment, the payment will get stuck. You'll have a lot of issues out here. Now, in order to make sure that you increase the capacity, you need to buy another server. You need to place the code on this server also. You need to put something known as a load balancer in order to make sure that the code or the request goes into both the servers. Again, this is a additional cost. This is now an additional cost. And again, now this operation is called as a scale up operation, wherein I'm increasing the capacity. And why am I increasing the capacity? Because the incoming traffic is very high. But what if this traffic is only high for a certain period of time? Let's say 1,000 users per second is only because maybe it was Diwali or Dasara and people are going to their hometown and all that stuff, and that's the reason application usage is high. But after that period, it again is coming back to 100 users per second. Then what should I do with this? I again have to scale down. Yeah, you don't need to use it that time. So what should I even do with this machine? I already bought it. I should still maintain it. Even though I'm not using it, I should still maintain this. I should still make sure that this is in use. I cannot again go back and sell it out, right? So scale up, scale down. Flexibility is a biggest issue. So what really happened is this. See, this model of operation doesn't really benefit anyone. Neither the server manufacturer, because no one is actually really looking into going into online world because of all this stuff. Because I have to buy a lot of servers, I have to maintain them and all that stuff. So what happened is that there was a company called VMware. The company is even still today right now. It's a company called VMware. What they said is that, you know what? See, if you buy a server, uh, let's utilize it in a better way. And what they said is that they introduced a software called hypervisor. What this hypervisor will do is that this hypervisor is a piece of software which will let you use the underlying infrastructure. This is called the underlying infrastructure in the sense this will give you the processing power, the capacity, the storage, and everything. This hypervisor is now going to, let's say, help you for a better utilization, better memory management, better utilization, and all these things. And on top of this hypervisor, you can create one more component called as a virtual machine. It's a piece of software called as a virtual machine out here. Not one, but I can create multiple things out here. Running on top of the same hypervisor and utilizing the underlying space of the server in a better way. Which means that this virtual machine doesn't know that this virtual machine exists. This virtual machine doesn't know that this one exists. All of them would try to, let's say, make sure that it is using the 100% of the capacity that is on the offer out here. So I'll try to use it. In that sense, the virtual machine was now a better piece of a software, which means that instead of directly putting my code onto the server, you can now put the code on these machines. I can host an application called irctc.co.in on this machine. This machine will have its own IP address. You can host a different application called uber.com on this machine. This machine will have its own IP address, and you can host a different application on this machine, and this machine will have its own IP address out here, which means that using a small piece of software called hypervisor, I'm able to now better utilize my applications. I'm telling the same machine is now segregated into multiple applications and etc. But again, this still doesn't solve my issue of scalability. Scale up, scale down. I still need to, let's say, purchase new servers. This doesn't solve my issue of maintenance. Now I also have an additional responsibility to maintain the hypervisor software also. I need to license it. Licenses also, let's say, come in 1 year periods. I need to renew the licenses very regularly, update my, let's say, piece of software and etc. That's where cloud is coming into picture. Cloud is telling, you know what? Cloud providers are telling today that, you know what? Don't worry about this part. I will buy the server. I will install the hypervisor. I will license it. I will update the server regularly. Don't worry about all these things. Please go ahead and simply create something called as virtual machine on top of it, and you can host your code in that. Now, if you want to scale up, meaning at the time of, let's say, Tatkal reservations, I want my capacity to go up. You can simply tell the cloud provider that, you know what, I want to scale up. The time it takes is 2 minutes, because I will always have multiple servers with me, just not for you, but a lot of customers. And now you are not buying anything, you're renting a service, you're renting a space, and this space is now delivered to you over the internet. Tell it, okay, fine, I'll deliver the space to you over the internet, and you can simply come into the Azure portal and you can create something known as VMs of operating systems of your choice. It can be Windows, Linux, Red Hat, Cent, whatever it is. Operating systems can be of your choice, and also you can tell what kind of a server you need, whether you need a 2012 server or 2013 server, 17 server, 19, 22. Is it latest? What exactly that you want to do? And you can go ahead and start creating all these things, and finally you can start hosting your applications on top of the server, and you can get them to work. So earlier what used to take around 3 to 6 months is now coming down to about, not even less than a week. If you have your code ready, you can simply go and create a machine, throw the code on top of it, it will start working. It will be up and running in, let's say, an hour or so, if you have the code ready out there as such. So this is what virtual machine has actually done to the entire world, is that, you know what, it's easier now to, let's say, create your applications, easier now to host your applications, cheaper, because I'm not buying anything, I'm renting something. If I don't want it, simply go ahead, delete it out, simple, nothing, and you can save your cost. So this is now, or this is how things are now working as such right now, and that's what I'm going into to explain how do you now go and create a virtual machine. And I am looking virtual machine from a business perspective on how do I host my application. So how do I convert my virtual machine? After that, how do I host my applications and all these things? This is something that we are going into. But before that, any questions that I can take till here? It depends upon, again, question here is that what are, I mean, most of the companies, what kind of operating systems they use. It just depends upon the kind of utilization you have. See, you can have Red Hat, you can have Windows, you can have Linux. It's not a hard and fast rule that you only use Windows or you only use, let's say, Ubuntu or something like that. Let's say, for example, if I have more of the applications, let's say I have Office 365, I want to host all these things on the cloud. I can go for a Windows operating system because it very well integrates with Windows. Let's say I have more of open source technologies. I will host it on a Linux machine because it's open source and it allows me to, let's say, develop it better. So it just depends upon what kind of utilization you have. Depending upon that, you can go ahead and, let's say, decide on the operating system as such. Yes, anyone, any more questions here? Okay, so let's now go into and start creating something called as a virtual machine out here. Now again, see, the virtual machine is not a very simple component, guys. In order to create a virtual machine, you firstly need to have a virtual network, at least one, in the same region where you want to create your virtual machine in. So very thumb rule is that your virtual machine and the virtual network cannot be in different regions out here as such. So you need a virtual network. And also when you create a virtual network, goes without saying, you'll get a subnet inside a virtual network, because you need at least one subnet to utilize this and all that stuff. So subnet inside the virtual network out here. So let me put this in proper way. And as and when you create these, you will now get your own private space. Agreed? Let's say that this virtual network is of the address space of 10.0.0.0 /16, and this subnet is of the address space of 10.0.0.0 /24. I'm now dividing my virtual network so that I get some isolation. I get some, let's say, private space of my own. And inside this private space is where you are allowed to go ahead and create a virtual machine. So let's look at that. So first let's go ahead. And again, as you see, if I go into virtual networks, I don't have any virtual network today. So I'll create one. I'll say create new. I'll say this is demo vnet or some demo VM or something like that. That's the resource group that I want to name this as. I will say this is a demo vnet SUS2, and okay, the IP address, right? It's a 10.0.0.0 and the subnet is 10.0.0.0 This is what it is, and I'll say review and create this out. It's running some final validations, and once this is done, I'll go ahead and create this in out here as such. So I'm creating something known as a virtual network along with one subnet out here in a region called as East US2. This is where I'm creating these two things out here, and I'm making this ready, and I'm keeping this ready out here as such. Now, when you are creating a virtual machine, there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. VMs will have its own piece of operating system. So you will have to decide on what is the operating system you need, whether it's Windows or Linux or what it is. VMs will also have a size. You need to tell how much of capacity you need. I'll say size. Is it a, let's say, 10 GB machine or 20 GB machine? What is the size out here, etc. And very importantly, there's something called as network interface card that gets created. Let's see that. Let's come back into my, let's say, subscription. And as of now, I have a virtual network created, and inside that virtual network, I have subnets that are created. Now I'll just go back and I'll say virtual machines. I'll say create, and I'll say Azure virtual machine. And as and when I do that, it's firstly going to ask me which subscription you want to create this virtual machine as a part of. I'll say Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. This is something that I do have. After that, it's saying which resource group. I'll say it is a demo VM. This is the resource group that I want to create this as a part of. Now it's asking what is the virtual machine name. Virtual machine naming convention is very simple. You can give any name. I'll say first VM. This is available. This is there. It's now asking which region do you want to create this virtual machine as a part of. Again, virtual machine should be created in the same region as your virtual network is. So I'll say okay, fine, it's ECS, so I'm good with that. There's something called availability options. I'll skip this for now. I'll have to come back to it and explain what availability option really means. Security type, I'll say it is standard. And very importantly, it's asking what image. Image here is nothing but operating system. What kind of an operating system would you really need? And here what I'll do is I want to, let's say, go ahead and create a Windows operating system out here. So I'll click on this drop down and I'll say, please give me something called as a Windows Server 2019 data center. It's a server operating system and not a home operating system out here. Home operating system are for you to consume, meaning for you to do your utilities and etc. Server operating systems are used to go ahead and host applications and all that stuff. So I'll say Windows Server 2019 Data Center Generation 2. I'll just scroll down, and here do you see what size of the machine? It's asking what kind of a machine size you need. I'll just click on see all sizes, and the sizes here, okay, the sizes here
Suresh,
row wise. Just a second. Okay, please go ahead.
Suresh, I'm sorry, there is a latency. I'm not sure from my end or your end. Could you please start from the starting of creating the VMware? I'm going to say you've already created it, but if you, can you go through the just steps? And as you're mentioning that
Mhm.
the IP address is starts 10.10.016, which I was not able to find it, where I only find the another IP address. Can you please
Okay,
take you through down for an just for a moment a test from where we need to,
sure.
because it's an important point. I'm sorry for
Sure,
bothering you.
sure.
Yeah.
So it's not the VM that I created, it's a virtual network that I created. So when I created a virtual network out here, I selected the resource group. I said the name of the virtual network is something like demo vnet east us2, something like this. I'll say the next security. I didn't do anything. I said IP addresses, and this is where I selected the IP address range. I said what is the address, and again I'll just say recess address space, and let's see. Fine, this is 10.0. Okay, fine. They have changed the portal slightly a little bit. I'll say delete this out. Delete the address space. Fine. So here I can go ahead and say this is 10.0.0.0. I can say what is the subnet size, and now you have a subnet size out here telling from 4/2 to 4/32. It's actually very good. They've done a good job here, because now if you see there's telling if you do a 4/13 what is the address, 4/15 what is the address, and all that stuff. And let's say 20, and I can go ahead and say this is the IP address, and I'll say add a subnet, and inside which you can also go ahead and select your subnet size, telling what is the subnet size and all that stuff. And now if you see subnet starting from 20, 20 greater than 20 and all that stuff. So it's 24. Okay, fine. 20 space, that's fine, not a problem. And so this is something like subnet A. String address, what is the string address? Let's see. Okay, let's say 10.0.0.0, something like 25 or something like this. And this is my subnet. I said add, and then I review and create this out. So I just created the virtual network and the subnet. So this is something that we already did in the earlier classes when we went and created the virtual network and the subnet of the virtual network. And I have the virtual network with me right now. Same thing, which is 10.0.0.0 for 16, and subnet with an address space of 10.0.0.0/24. So this is what I did. I didn't do anything, let's say, really different. I just went and created the virtual network and the subnet. I did not even start creating the virtual machine as such out there. Does it answer your question?
So now we have hired 251 servers, right? We can say it in
Uh,
that way.
yes, you can say it in that way. You
Okay.
can create 251 servers in this particular address space or in this particular subnet out here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank
Okay. So let's go back into our virtual machines and say create a virtual machine, Azure virtual machine out here. And once I do that, I'll say go ahead, select the resource group. I'll say this is my first VM. I'll say East US2. I'll just scroll down. Availability options, as I said, I'll just skip this for now. Security, I'll say standard. Image, I'll select the image as Windows Server 2019 data center out here as such. I'll scroll down. Size, this is where I was.
you. What is this image actually,
Operating
Suresh?
system. Image is nothing
Okay.
but operating system that you want.
Okay.
All right, so I'm coming down, selecting the image, and after that, I am going into the size of the machine. And now Azure is asking me how big or how small of a machine that you actually need. And this is told in terms of something called as a series of machine out here. It's telling you have a series called DS1V2, you have something called DS2V3, you have D2S and etc. So let's say you go for D2SV3. In D2SV3, you are going to get two vCPUs, virtual CPUs out here. Did you hear about this CPUs anytime? Anyone on what are CPUs?
Central Processing Unit.
Processing units. Did you hear this particular terminology anytime when you are purchasing a laptop or something like that? Yes. The shopkeeper will say it's a 2-core CPU, 4-core CPU, 8-core, 6-core memories and all that stuff, which means the power, the processing power the machine actually gives you. Earlier days, you had a big, let's say, box. We called it as a CPU and all that stuff. Now everything is now compiled, given it to you in the form of a laptop, right? And even the laptop, right? You go into a shop, just ask what kind of a machine is this. They'll tell you it's an i3 machine with 2-core CPUs. It's an i5 machine with 4-core CPUs and etc. In the same way, Microsoft Azure is telling, you know what? I will give you a 2-core machine, meaning I'll give you two CPUs to process, which means you can do two parallel operations at the same time. And then you have what? RAM, random access memory, 8 GB of RAM. Then it's saying there is something called data disks, IOPS, temporary storage, and all that stuff. So IOPS and etc. We'll cover it along with the disks part of, let's say, the lecture. So what I'll do is I'll select a size. I'll say, you know what? Go ahead, give me something like a two, let's say, vCore CPUs, with meaning virtual CPUs out here, and 8 GB RAM. Again, you can scale up your size anytime. Let's say at a later point in time I realize 8 GB of memory is not sufficient. I want to go for 32. You can simply go and do a resizing of your machine without even impacting the software. Nothing. It'll take about 2 or 3 minutes of time. Again, you have multiple series of machines like D series and etc. And if you look at this, right, there is a lot on the offer. There is a lot on the offer out here. Again, there is also 20 core CPUs. See, in the physical world, the maximum I heard is 16 core CPUs out here. You have 20 core CPUs, 80 GB of memory and all that stuff. And if you go for F series and all that stuff, right, you will get much more higher powered machines. Do you see? 128 GB of CPUs and all that stuff. So you kind of get a lot of processing power when you go for a virtual machine, and the capacity and the offering out there is unlimited. You can choose any kind of offering out here, telling that, you know what, I need a 2-core, or let's say a 4-core or a 16-core, whatever it is. For now, I'll just go ahead with something like D2 D2SV3, which will give me somewhere around 2 GB or two virtual cores and 8 GB of memory, and I'll say select. I'm selecting a random size. And now it's telling cost here is what? Somewhere around 5,000 rupees per a month. Meaning, if you go for this capacity, I will rent this particular space out to you, and I'll charge you somewhere around 5,000 rupees for this particular rental basis per a month. I'll say, okay, great. And now it's telling, you know what, you're creating a machine, right? You want to log into that machine? Give me the credentials. Like, what is the username, what is the password, and all that stuff. I'll say, this is test user, something like this. And I'll give a random password out here. I'll give a random password out here. And I'll just scroll down. Something called what? Inbound port rules. Guys, this is now very, very, very important on what do you mean by a port rule out here as such. See, now you're creating a virtual machine on a cloud like Azure. And where are you creating a virtual machine in? Within the virtual network. You're creating a virtual machine within the virtual network out here. Now, if you create the machine within the virtual network, I as a user cannot really access this machine from the internet. This is something that I cannot do because this machine is sitting into your private space. If you want to do this, if you want to access the machine over the internet, then you need to allow something called as an inbound port. Port is nothing but an opening. Here it's a virtual opening out here that you're creating, and you're giving some rules telling that, you know what, probably I will allow HTTP traffic, meaning if I'm using the internet, I can simply go over the internet and talk to this machine. Just go over the internet and talk to this machine out here. Or I will allow something called RDP protocol, remote desktop protocol out here, meaning I can directly connect to this machine, go inside this machine from the internet using my, let's say, local laptop and all that stuff. So all these things are controlled by something called as an inbound port rule. And now it's telling, you know what, select which virtual machine ports are accessible from the public internet. You can specify more limited or granular network on the networking tab. So we can also look at that. But for now, what I'll do, I'll just remove everything. Okay, I'll say none. I'm not allowing anything. This machine just is in the virtual space. I'll say none. We'll talk about why I said none here. I'll say next. I'm going into the disks of the machine. See, if it's a machine, just like, you know, you have a laptop, your laptop needs disks like C drive, D drive, and all that stuff. Usually, C drive is where your operating system is hosted, and that's what it is telling. You know what? I will give you something called as an OS disk, operating system disk, which is what? Premium SSD, solid state drive, and what? Locally redundant storage, LRS. It's telling, you know what? If you go ahead create a machine, this machine will have a disk attached to it. The disk is of the type called what? Premium solid state drive, and I will give you this disk in the form of local redundant storage out here, meaning you will have 3 copies of that particular, let's say, data stored always. And if I just scroll down, I can add something called what? Data disks. Like, let's say, for example, this will only and only give you 128 GB of storage. By default, OS disk is what? 128 GB of storage out here. But if you want to, let's say, go ahead and add a D drive, or let's say a G drive or an F drive or something like that, you can simply go here and I can say create and attach a new disk. If I click this, I can say this is a drive D, and it's asking what is the size. I can change the size. I can have as low as 4 GB. I can have as high as, let's say, 32,600, let's say 767 GB out here. This is the, let's say, size options that I do have. So I'll just go ahead with the existing size, which is 1024 terabyte or 1024 GB out here, meaning 1 terabyte out here. I'll say okay. Now what you can do is that now you can, I mean, you can go ahead, assign a drive letter to it and all that stuff, and you can create a disk of your own, and you can attach multiple disks. How many more disks that you can attach here? Any guesses? How many more disks do you think that you can attach here? Two. How do you know that it is two? Mm-hmm. Where we can see RAM and capacity, there you can see something. So let's go back
Three
there.
more, sir. We have choose.
We can create.
I think we have choose.
How many data disks? Four. So the size
Remaining
of the
three.
machine that you select also decides what are the number of data disks that you actually get out here. The size of the machine that you do also decides what is the number of data disks that you can attach. So at max, I can do more, 3 more out here. I can say 3 more data disks that I can attach with this particular, let's say, machine. So for now, I went ahead and said it is drive D. I just said drive D. This is what is the size, 1024 GB, premium SSD. And I said, okay, fine, hosting cache and all that stuff. That's fine. I'll say next. Networking. Very importantly, this is what I was telling. Your virtual machine needs to be created within a virtual network. That's what it is asking me. what is the virtual network, what is the subnet, and what is the public IP of the machine. As of now, I won't, let's say, come to the public IP. I'll say none. I'll just scroll down, and again, inbound rules and all that stuff. I'll say, okay, this is all good. I'll say next management. I'll say next monitoring. I'll just disable everything right now. I'll just simply create a small machine. I'll say advanced. I'll say tags. I'll say review and create. So what am I doing in the first page? I'm selecting things like what is my image or operating system that the machine should run on, whether it is Windows, and if it is Windows, which version of Windows. Is it Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows 2019 data centers, and etc. In the disks, I had an operating system disk. I also attached data disk here, and in the networking, I was telling what is the virtual network, what is the subnet, and where should the machine be created. This is what I'm doing, and finally, after I do all these things, uh, you don't have to do it right away, because if I go ahead and explain everything at one go, it'll become a little difficult for you to follow. So that's the reason I'm covering these three tabs firstly, management and etc. I'll come down slowly. So as and when I do that, now I'm getting an estimated cost of what, 6 rupees per an hour out here. So I'll say I'm good with that, and I'll hit the create button out here. Now this will go ahead and start creating a virtual machine for me out here as such, within this particular virtual network address space out here as such out there. So now I'm getting the virtual machine. So let's wait for the virtual machine to be created, and let's see what I get with the virtual machine out here as such. Yes, any questions till here? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here?
Suresh, just a question like, first
Mhm.
we have created virtual network, then after we created the virtual machine, right?
Correct.
So without virtual network, we cannot create virtual machine.
Exactly.
Okay, so virtual machine is something like subnet or it's a different
Now,
entity?
virtual machine is not a subnet. Subnet is within the virtual network. Virtual machine is something that gets attached to a subnet. It's an actual
Okay,
device, like your
okay,
storage account. Your storage account is getting attached to the subnet. In the same way,
okay,
a virtual network or virtual machine gets attached to, let's say, your subnet out here.
okay, got it.
Okay. And Deepak is asking, can we attach four different types of GBs in the data disk? Four different, or put your question in a better way, can I have four different data disks of different sizes? Yes, you can have it. Shouldn't be an issue at all. The first data disk can be 4 GB. The last data disk can be 32,000 GB also. Shouldn't be a problem.
Hello, sir. Is virtual machine is only useful for maintaining the server, or is there any other things?
Can you come again, please? I didn't get your question.
Is virtual machine is useful for maintaining the server, or is there any other use of it?
Is virtual machine useful for, again, virtual machine is primarily used for application hosting, meaning you can host your own websites and all that stuff. Not only that, but there are multiple usages of virtual machine, which we'll talk about, let's say, in what is the usage of the machine and etc. And then probably that will address your question. But the primary usage of the machine is to go ahead and host the applications out there as such.
Okay, in IAS, right?
I'm sorry.
In IAS, we are push our code into there, right, for our server. So it will be connected to server.
I'm not sure if it is at mine, but the voice is a little distorted, so I'm not able to really get your question. So can you please type that in, Pravalika? I'll take that out in the chat window.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, any more questions here? All right. So now if you see when the virtual machine got created, right? It's just not the machine which got created. There are a couple of components of the machine which got created out here. Very importantly, When you create a machine, you get something called as a network interface card that gets created, NIC card. Did anyone hear about network interface anytime before? Did you hear this terminology called NIC, network interface card, anytime before? Okay, what it is, we don't know exactly, no problem. Again, each and every computer or each and every laptop, anything that you buy will come with something called as a network interface card. What will the network interface card do is that it will allow your laptop to communicate with the outside world over the internet. Very simple. Since I have a network interface card in my laptop, I'm able to connect to the Wi-Fi and able to talk to you all over, let's say, the online class out here. I'm able to talk to you all. So network interface card is for communication purpose. It's very, very important. It's a very important component, and without a network interface card, you cannot create a virtual machine. It's very simple. You cannot create a virtual machine out here. So the very first thing is a network interface card that gets created, and the network interface card gets attached to the subnet. It's not the virtual machine which gets attached to the subnet. It is the network interface card that gets attached to the subnet. And as and when it does, when I create a virtual machine, the virtual machine now will get attached to the network interface card out here as such. So network interface card is getting attached to the subnet, and network interface card at the other end is getting attached to the virtual machine out here. And you will have one more thing that gets created, which is called as an NSG rule, network security group rule, NSG out here. And I'm putting this NSG outside the network. It's a component that gets created outside the network. And NSG out here will have a set of rules. It's a rule block which tells you who will access this much or who can access this virtual machine, who cannot access this virtual machine, and etc. Again, I'm just giving you the very overview of it. We'll any which ways go into each and every component and discuss about that. I'm just giving you an overview as of now on what is NIC card, how is your machine created, and all that stuff. And finally, you have the NSG rule out here. So that's the reason if you check this out, right? You have the network security group rule. You have disks that are getting created, network interface card that is getting created, and finally you have what? Virtual machine that is getting created. Again, this is something called as schedules and all that stuff, meaning it will tell you that the virtual machine can be shut down in, let's say, something like an hour or so, something like that. I'll just say go to resource. Now I have the virtual machine, and very importantly, this virtual machine will have something called as a address, a private address, 10.0.0.4. This address is coming from the subnet that you created. The subnet is 10.0.0.0/24, which means it has IPs, and the subnet is giving one IP from the pool, and it is saying, okay, fine, virtual machine, you take this. Now, earlier when we created a virtual network, you had how many? 251 subnets or 251 addresses in that subnet. Now, if I go here, available IPs are how many? 250, which means one IP of this pool is given to the virtual machine, and you can see that in this, in let's say something known as connected devices. What is this? First VM 508. What is this? Network interface card of what? The virtual machine. That's what I was telling you, is that the virtual machine is not attached directly to the subnet. It is a network interface card of the virtual machine which is attached to the subnet. And if I click on this particular, say, device called network interface card, it is attached to what? First VM. What is first VM here? The virtual machine. Exactly. This is how the connection is. You have a virtual machine, you have a virtual network. Inside that you have a subnet, and that subnet basically, or you have a network interface card that gets attached to the subnet. And as and when this get attached, the subnet will give one IP to the network interface, and that IP is given to your virtual machine in turn in written out here as such. Yes, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here that I can take? Again, I know it'll be a little confusing in the very first
So,
class.
uh,
Hmm.
Suresh, with the private IP, we will go and connect with the RDC, right? I mean, it's
You say
virtual.
RDP, remote desktop connection.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So it is not okay. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how do you connect to it. Okay, sorry, just a second. Okay, fine. We'll talk about how do you connect to it. But is it the private IP? Not really. If I am coming over the internet, I cannot be using a private IP address out here. We'll also look at what is the significance of the private IP out here as such. But no, it is not the private IP. If you want to connect to the machine over the internet, you will need a public IP address, which is not assigned to the machine yet. We will talk about how do you assign that and all that stuff. Yes, any more questions here, guys? Again, the intention for today's class is just to give the basic understanding of what a virtual machine is. Create a virtual machine. I'm not going into the use case of it because to do the use case, I firstly have to cover all the components of the machine. We'll have to understand what are the components. Once we are comfortable with the components, we'll go into how to use the machine out here, how to connect to the machine out here, and etc. So the intention of today is just go ahead and do the theory of it. What is a virtual machine in Azure? Just type this question in. This is where you'll get virtual machines in Azure. Azure virtual machines in one of the several types of on-demand scale and etc. What do I do? If I just scroll down, it's saying manage this and etc. Just scroll down further. It's telling quick start, create a virtual machine on the Azure portal, or create a Windows machine on the Azure portal and etc. Windows VM on the Azure portal. It'll just go and tell you how do you, let's say, create a machine, what exactly is a machine, all that stuff. So what I want you all to do is just get the overview of what a virtual machine really is. It's telling what is virtual machine, what is orchestrations and all that stuff. Just the overview of what the virtual machine really is. And in tomorrow's session, we'll talk about what are all the components of the machine, and then we'll move into what is the use case of the machine, how do you use it and how do you enhance the usage and all that stuff. Yes, any more questions here, guys? Anyone, any questions that I can take till you? All right, so that's it for mine, guys. We'll meet tomorrow and we'll discuss more on what are virtual machines, what are the use case scenarios of this and etc. Thank you and have a good day ahead. Thanks, guys.